might have been Hamitic nations. Excuse me, forgive me for that. Had a phone call, but we're back to it. It might have been Hamitic nations. In Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees, excellency, right? Because the excellency of the Chaldees, when you go into the Chaldees, they were experts at witchcraft. Babylon, right? The glory of kingdoms, because when you go into um, American hegemony, right? Before they started spiraling that war machine in the Pentagon. At one point in time, America was beautified, like the 1930s, the 14s, right? The early 1900s, for example. That was the excellency of, not the excellence, that was the glory of Babylon, okay? And the excellency goes to the sorceries that they practice here, right, in America, on the shores of America for the good success, right? Which thou hast labored from thy youth. You know, the same thing that they have been practicing since the olden days, right? This is what they practice here in Babylon because they copy every ritual, every god is worship here. Why? Because one thing Esau understands is that these gods are nothing but demons that give you power. Okay, and that's what men understand. You know, I was watching that historical video and I was seeing how our people were betraying the trust of Yahawashi because um, they seen how successful these nations were with these different gods. But the scripture says the gods of the other nations are idols. But Yahawashi made heavens and earth, and that has been Israel's number one problem is that they want to be like the nations. Okay, they don't like being a monotheistic nation. When you go into mono, it means one. Theistic goes into belief in God or a higher power. They always believed in one higher power, but other nations, they were polytheistic. Even your so-called Ishmaelites, the Arabs, which are over there causing issues with the Persians, right? When you go into the Arabic pagan gods, right? This is just a brief history that I've been looking up. It talks about pre-Islamic Arabic paganism, which is funny because when you talk to these Ishmaelites, they claim that they believe in one God, but before Muhammad came on the scene and all that nonsense came about, they were heathens. You know, they worship many gods, and they still do. Why do you think these Arab royal families are so rich, even with Ishmael's blessing? Why? Because of these gods that they worship. Okay, that's why they do these, these rituals and these Dubai porta potties and all these things. That shit goes back to what they were doing when they were traveling as these Bedouin tribes. Okay, which is gonna play a part in prophecy. Now, let me get into the itty gritty of the scripture. Let's go to 2nd Esdras, the 15th chapter. Okay. I'm gonna read probably in this let me see. In the RSV. This is 2nd Esdras 15 verse 28. A terrifying vision of warfare. It says, behold, a terrifying sight appearing from the east, right? It was a vision. The nations of the dragons of Arabia should come out with many chariots. Because you have the Arabic nations that have been beaten down, right? Because they don't have the blessing of the sword, which Esau has. That's Genesis, the 27th chapter, if I'm not mistaken, right? Goes into the blessing of the sword and the dew of heaven from above, right? The best places of the world, okay? They don't have that blessing. But one thing they do have is that wild nature, that oil and that wild nature, describing the characteristics of Ishmael, you know? The nations of the dragons of Arabia shall come out with many chariots, and from the day that they set out, their hissing shall spread over the earth, right? Talking about the Arabic nations. And so that all who hear them will fear and tremble, right? And that day is coming because these Arabic nations, right, go into Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and other Arabic nations out there, even the ones that have been mixing amongst the other populace, right? Case in point, Persia. They have that craziness in them, and that's what's causing the division over there in Persia, right? In Elam, is because these Persians, they don't worship Allah. You know, they don't mess with Islam. They have their own culture, their own beliefs. Zoroastrianism, right? If I'm not mistaken. I talk to Persian people from time to time. You know, I believe that I might have been in Persia at one point in time in my past life. It's just so familiar, Persia. But Iran, right? Iran has a kind of like a racial tension between the Arabs and the Elamites, okay? But in future prophecy, they're going to unite together. And that's why you see what's going on with these different protests. Because these Persian, especially with these Persian women, they're very promiscuous, right? Because that's just who they are. When you go into the magic and things that they practice, you know, these Persians, I met a Persian woman before. You know, they're not as monotheistic as you think. They worship many gods. You know, when you go into that Zoroastrianism thing that their forefathers practiced. Okay. Also, the Carmanians, right, which are the Iranians, right, the real Iranians, the real Persians, the descendants of Persia, that have that Persian blood fighting through them. They're the ones that are coming up with these different cutting edge technology and warfare and science, right? The Arabs, they're not really innovating anything, you know, because they still have that Bedouin nature in them. I would say this Ishmael is like one of the dumbest tribes out there, one of the dumbest nations. But one thing I would say is that they are somewhat over there when it comes to, the law and everything, right, with the halal meat and how they prepare it. But they're still heathens at the end of the day because they're children of the bondwoman, right? Children of the flesh and not children of the promise, not children of the seed, okay? They're sons of Hagar, okay? And we could go into the blessing of Ishmael, okay, and describe who he is. This is Genesis 16, verse 12. We go into the 17th chapter, actually, right? This is Genesis, the 17th chapter. All right, let me go. This is in the NIV. Is when the this is Genesis 17 verse 20. It says, "And as for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will surely bless him. I will make him fruitful and will greatly increase his numbers." You know, the Arabs are very, very, very vast in numbers. Okay, they're very fruitful. They have a lot of people. He will be the father of 12 rulers, and I will make him into a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you by this time next year. When he had finished speaking with Abraham, Yahawah went up from him, through the voice of an angel. Okay, so Yashama'Allah, right? Yashama'Allah became fruitful and increased in numbers, right? The Lord had mercy on Hagar. We could go into that as well, right? When Hagar was leaving, he gave Ishmael a blessing, right? Not when Hagar was, but when Hagar was in the desert, she was suffering. And a voice of the Lord came to her and blessed Ishmael and told her when Ishmael was going to dwell, in the land of Havilah, all right? So that's why these Ishmaelites, especially these Arab leaders, are blessed with so much oil. It's because the land that their inheritance came upon, and they know their history very well. They know everything. All right, these Bedouin tribes, they kept records, especially of the nations that they conquered, and the nations that they enslaved. Now let's go to Genesis the 16th chapter, verse 12. Right, talking about Ishmael's nature. Let's go to verse 11. Right. Verse 7, it says, the angel of the Lord Yahawah, Bahasham Yahawah, found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was a spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, or Sarah, where have you come from, and where are you going? I'm running away from my mistress Sarah, she answered, right, because she was a slave woman, a bondwoman, right? And the Lord didn't really give a fuck about her. It was just for the story. Then the angel of the Lord, Yahawah, told her, go back to your mistress and submit to her, right? The angel added, I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. The angel of the Lord also said to her, you are now pregnant, and you'll give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael. For the Lord Yahawah has heard of your misery. He'll be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. And he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. And that's the reason why the Arabs are like that, They blow each other up. They blow other people up. They don't get along. Those Bedouin tribes, they wage war against each other for ages and generations, starting after, the 12 sons of Ishmael that became 12 different Arabic nations, right? Just like us, they became 12 tribes. We became 12 tribes. They became 12 tribes of Ishmael, because the Lord deals with the number 12 a lot. Same with the Dukes of Edom, okay? That's just how it goes, and that's their nature. That's how you describe them. That's how you identify them. And the Arabs, they hate it, but it's true. It's in who they are. It's their spirit. They're wild people. That's why you have to be careful. That's why you see people that voted far right, right wing. Their main objective is to keep Islam out. Even you darker skinned Somalis, because you copy after that nature. Because truth be told, you guys are descendants of Ishmael as well. You had the women who were raped, right, by these Arabic men and left seed there. So you have descendants of Ishmael there. Some Jake, right? I don't really fuck with Somalians like that, so I'm just being biased. I don't like Somalians. But yeah, Israel is everywhere. And you got heathens, Hamites, Cush, particularly, right? Because that's what they are. They're Cushites mixed with Ishmael, mixed with Yasharala, all right? And there's no such thing as called mixed, but you know what I mean. They mingle. Okay? So let's go back to 2nd Ezra, the 15th chapter. Oh, real quick, going into the Shia and to the Sunni thing, that goes into their division. Sunni and Shia are two main branches of Islam. separated historically by the 7th century dispute over who should succeed their prophet Muhammad. So that also goes into the division as well, because when you go into Islam, there are two main branches. You got Shia and you got Sunni. And Esau, he uses that to his advantage because these Arabs, they're extremely religious. You know, they have that zeal for their prophet Muhammad. Why? Because they're heathens, you know, and they were descendants from Abraham, but that's where it cuts off. So they have that faith in their gods and their God Allah who they worship. Okay? So let's go back to Second Esdras, the 16th chapter. And also the Carmanians, raging in wrath, shall go forth like wild boars of the forest, and with great power they shall come, engage them in battle, and shall devastate a portion of the land of the Assyrians with their teeth. And the land of the Assyrians is talking about that north country, right, where all the nations are gonna meet up there above the land of Israel in that Fertile Crescent area. Okay, that's where the battle is gonna be. You know, and it also talks about the battles from past time as well. Okay. Verse 31, and the dragons, remembering their origin, right, shall become still stronger, and if they combine in great power and turn to pursue them, then these shall be disorganized and silenced by their power, and shall turn and flee. And from the land of the Assyrians, an enemy in ambush shall beset them, and destroy one of them, and fear and trembling shall come upon their army, and indecision upon their kings. So Esdras was prophesying of the battles, right? Because, you know, this was a battle that was going to come. Going to Esdras, I believe, if I'm right, he was there during, I don't want to get the history and the timeline wrong, but the Assyrians, right, especially these Assyrians, the battle that took place was right before the deportation of the Northern Kingdom, you know, when the Assyrians were conquering, right? That's where this you know, that scripture was mentioned for. But you also have future parts, you know, the Carmanians remembering their nature. You know, the Persians, they're going to remember who they are. You know, that they're warriors, okay? And that's what Yahawashi is doing in the valley of the city, Yahawashi. Let's get that. This is Joel, the 3rd chapter. Okay. You can start at verse 14, really, but I'm going to start at verse 12. Verse 11. It says, assemble yourselves and come, all ye heathen, and gather yourselves together round about. There to cause thy mighty ones to come down, O Yahawah, Bahasham, because the angels have to be involved, not only to control the minds of the kings, you know, of these great old men, but also to turn the tides of the battle. Let the heathen be wakened, right? And I always laugh because people, they think Iran is weak because of the sanctions that have been placed upon them, because of the revolutions that they went through, right? Iran is no pushover. I would just say that right now, because when they had that war with the Israelis, right, that 12-day war, people don't realize, but the international media coverage did a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? Reputation saving. Okay, it salvaged the reputation of the Israelis as being this undefeatable force in the Middle East. Okay, if Israel was so strong, then they would go toe to toe with Iran and it would have conquered them. Why do they need allies like the U.S. and the European, you know, the NATO and so on and so forth? Because the Iranians have shit that the Israelis don't have. It's that missile technology, right? And drone. Because drones have changed, you know, the tide of battle, right? It has changed a lot of things. You can develop $200 drones with the highest tier package, implement AI into it, and take out a $50 million helicopter, right? That's standing idle. Okay, so it's money, logistics, right? Economics. It's utility. It's a lot of things versus what most nations are spending on, because it's not that they want to do it, but it's by force because they make these lucrative contracts to make money back. It's money laundering. That's what they do in wars. So they're bound by that because, they have a goal, wipe all debt with the Quran and whatnot. But these different other nations, they're taking a different step forward with their technology and the warfare, using drones, implementing them, using missile technology with Shah, the Fatah 2s, right? The Shah 1, the Shah 2, the ballistic, the hypersonics, okay? You had President Trump talk about the concept of a golden dome, which is going to use orbit satellites to intercept missiles. But that itself is like 5 trillion. That's a couple $1 trillion right there. And I perceive that Yahawashi won't even allow them to achieve that concept, because that concept in itself is an act of pride. Okay, that is in itself is an act of pride. People called it the rods of God. That itself is an act of pride, trying to use orbit, right? Space itself, satellites, you know, going into many scriptures, Ezekiel the 28th chapter, right? Set his nest upon stars. That goes into Obadiah, okay? It doesn't get any clearer than that. The fact that he mentioned Golden Dome and he go into it and talks about the orbit satellites, if it's not this man, then where and who is he? As Job said, where and who is he? Where is the wicked? Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and leave it at that. Let me read a bit more before I close out. Let the heathen be wakened and come up to the valley of Yahawashi, right? When you go into, that's the valley of decision, right? Because the Lord has a decision made. It's to judge these nations around about. You can go into Joel, right? I believe it's the not the second chapter, but it might be the third chapter. It talks about they sold a boy for a harlot and a girl for wine that they might drink, right? I might be getting it backwards, but that's what these nations did. They divided the Lord's portion, which, the portion of the Lord is Israel, okay? Assemble yourselves and come all you heathen, and gather yourselves together around about, and thither cause thy mighty ones to come down, O Yahawah. Let the heathen be wakened, and come up to the valley of Yahawashi. For there will I sit to judge all the heathen round about, right? All the heathen round about, because that's where the war is going to be centered around, that fertile crescent. Put ye in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come get you down, for the press is full, the fats overflow, for their wickedness is great. When the Lord has had enough, right, of the nonsense that they're doing all throughout the world, okay? When her judgment has reached unto heaven, right? And her sins have entered into the clouds, multitudes in the valley of decision. For the day of the Lord Yahawah Bahasham is near in the valley of decision. Okay? So again, the title of this lesson is Yahawah Bahasham will unite the Persians. Okay? Because there's going to be a spirit of patriotism there. All right, all that riff-raff and that nonsense with, woman ideology and feminism, that shit's going to be out the window. Because in times of war, men get stronger and women go back to their natural nature. Right, it's to be a woman and it's to care for the children. Even back then in the ancient world, women were tough. Yeah, they killed men to defend their children. Okay? So with that, I'm going to give all praises, honors, and glories due to Yahawah, Bahasham, Yahawashi, Bahasham, Rakahak, Wadash, giving double honors to the apostles, bishops, and elders.